As the field of documentary filmmaking has grown, a parallel group of films have developed alongside it, borrowing techniques such as Griersonian narration, the avant-garde, direct cinema and cinema verite in order to tell a different story, principally couched in entertainment. So I asked the question that nobody needs answering as an excuse to talk about some films and shows. In what way, if any, are these mockumentaries uniquely able to reflect a particular kind of truth? And what techniques do they use to imitate traditional documentaries? To this end, this discussion will consider a close reading of different approaches, including mocking the artifice of documentary itself in The Rutles, the use of fake found footage and metaphor in Troll Hunter, and the use of satire through the recontextualization of images in Time Trumpet. This analysis will also look at some of the counter-arguments, the dangers of attempting to fool audiences via the hoax of forgotten silver, and the potential ethnographic problems of the TV show Trailer Park Boys. Of course, in many ways, This Is Spinal Tap is the epitome of mock rockumentaries. However, first came The Rutles, a pastiche of the life and times of the Beatles. Some commentators have concluded that the film represents a missed opportunity in satire, that in providing a mere imitation of the Fab Four, it skirts the realm of satire's poorer cousin, parody. The Rutles constitutes an example of what Roscoe and Haidt, in their book Faking It, consider a Degree 1 form of mock documentary. Audiences of Degree 1 texts are not explicitly encouraged or confronted with a need to reflect on the factual means of representation themselves. They would argue that due to a lack of characterisation or real critique of the Beatles, there is little to gain from its viewing bar as a piece of entertainment. The fact that it on the whole plays it safe could be something to do with a conflict of interest. In order to provide a form of authenticity to the film, Eric Idle employed the use of actual celebrities for the talking head sequences that included Mick Jagger, Paul Simon, and the poet Roger McGough. Crucially, there was also a cameo role for George Harrison, who in the same year founded Handmade Films with the expressed intent of essentially bankrolling Life of Brian, what Terry Jones described as the most expensive movie ticket of all time. However, even if one puts aside the film's acerbic subtitle, All You Need Is Cash, the film doesn't always pull its punches. Examples include mocking the group's interest in the Maharishi Yogi through the prism of shifty Arthur Sultan, the Surrey mystic, and similarly the shocked and stunned reaction to the character of Leggy Mountbatten getting a teaching post is clearly a direct reference to the aftermath of the sudden death of Brian Epstein.
He told us to, not to get overwhelmed by grief, and to whatever thoughts we have of Brian, to keep them happy, because any thoughts we have of him will travel to him wherever he is.
He did say that we could still keep in touch with him, you know, by tapping the table.
And postcards.
Yeah.
To uphold its believability, The Rutles replicates the film stock and style of the Beatles' most well-known TV and film performances to an uncanny ability. This includes a vignette aping the US First Visit documentary, which is fused together with the kind of narration that would have been used in newsreels by the likes of the Hollywood star.
And then it's back to the hotel for a bit of fun and games.
This is us having breakfast.
This is tea. You know, we drink
Very good breakfast.
We put the water in the tea.
A performance at Shea Stadium, and even the animation of Yellow Submarine. The songs are parodied to a precision by Neil Innes, but here it is this commitment to impersonation that possibly prevents the Rutles from reaching certain satiristic heights. Innes himself had only 3 months to write all the tracks, but would eventually get the chance to fuse more of his own style with the Rutles when he returned to the concept in the 90s with the album Archaeology. As far as the film stands, however, as Roscoe and Haidt identify, the lyrics are changed just enough for Beatles fans to recognise the difference, but do not attempt an explicit commentary on the band itself.
Waking up a fever in a one-horse town was a jockey by the name of Joe. He didn't have a lot of what you might call luck, but he had a lot of get up and go.
As the saying goes, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But then again, there is something to be said that their similarity helps to throw shade at the kind of hero-worshipping hyperbolism that is present in some Beatles docs, by taking any perceived depth and simplifying the message to the realm of banality. What's in a name? Well, If All We Need Is Love was called Love Life, and John, Paul, George and Ringo were Dirk, Ron, Stig and Barry, perhaps they wouldn't have been taken so seriously.
Tea was on everyone's lips.
Ultimately, it seems more plausible to contend that the Rutles' strongest suit is mocking the format of documentary itself, rather than the Beatles, which due to its self-reflexive and anarchic nature, it is able to achieve in a rather comprehensive way. The Pythons had a long history of using mockumentary elements, and one of their stock in trades was the stoic news reporter type. The film is peppered with such mockery.
So, we went to New Orleans to find out just how expensive it is to make these documentaries. I'm standing by the banks of the Mississippi. I'm standing by the banks of the Mississippi in Louisiana, the cradle of the blues. That's black music sung mainly by whites. And we're here to find out the black origins of Rutle music. I spoke with Blind Lemon Pie.
Well, everything I learned from the Rutles.
From the Rutles, really?
If the Rutles traded mainly on nostalgia, then Time Trumpet represented a rejection of it. A British television series created during the mid-noughties, it lampooned the then current glut of nostalgic retrospective documentaries such as I Love the 90s, which filled the television listings. Much like Trumpet, these utilised talking heads of celebrities to comment on well-loved or remembered events of a particular year, often in a very narrow-focused or rose-tinted manner.
I thought Take That were excellent. I mean, everyone thought it was a girl band, and I think everyone liked Take That, but no one would admit to it.
The first episode begins by looking back on the year 2007 from the perspective of 2031. It's clear that the first order of business is taking the arguably lazy format of the show to task.
Talk about television.
Well,
this is evident when Armando Iannucci, doubling as both creator and off-camera interviewer, freely admits to his subject.
For just now, we really just want simple sound bites out of you.
The interviewees include real celebrities alongside older actors playing famous people as they may, or may not, look in the future. Some of this may provide a sense of authenticity, but if a viewer caught the programme whilst channel hopping, they'd soon discover it was fake. What is really put on trial are the pat responses given in these types of shows, whose editing usually gives little time for reflection.
Jet was fit. They should have called her fit. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. She was fit, and she was Jet.
Examples abound in Trumpet, such as, you can't have two prime ministers, it's like having two parents. Iannucci subverts this in one talking head sequence by questioning the validity of an interviewee's stock answer. They reply,
I agree with you, but what I was trying to make a kind of clever point, and I wasn't expecting you to meet that head on with logic.
Real news footage is often incorporated into the show. One might contend that this is a form of insincerity, which might cloud the truth of the original footage. However, there could be some credence to the idea that this performs the opposite function. Due to the absurdity of the context, Trumpet and their predecessors Brass Eye and The Day Today commented on the present through the lens of comedy. As a result, audiences were more likely to remember the message. Trumpet went one or two steps further in its incorporation of doctored footage or mixed media. For example, during a clip of Tony Blair greeting schoolchildren, the word murderer is superimposed onto a whiteboard in the background. This reflected a slice of public opinion and probably would have been denounced if incorporated into a real documentary. In another example, an actor playing an old aide of then Prime Minister David Cameron remarks upon a piece of publicity footage where Cameron adjusted his sleeve to better reveal an England wristband. The aide remarks how he had coached him during this moment to do so, which adds a kind of value of the likely intention behind the footage. This is where mockumentary can cut through the subtext and go straight for the text. Of course, mockumentary is not alone in its ability to take liberties with non-fictional material. For example, this sequence in Chris Marker's Sans Soleil, where sleeping Japanese commuters are intercut with their imagined dreams. taking the form of footage of local television. Experimental found footage filmmaker Godfrey Reggio was known to recontextualise images, most famously in the seminal work Koyaanisqatsi, by using different effects including slow motion and time-lapse, sometimes to create a form of multi-interpretive tone poem, other times seemingly in order to spark debate about a subject, such as war. Recontextualisation allows for conflicting authority within a shared frame, history and counter-history within the same work. It is within this contradiction that lies the truth, since history itself is not always an exact science. Therefore, one might stretch the argument that the reimagining of news footage in Time Trumpet brings out more of a revelatory reading than just the original. Sometimes the footage is a means to an end, and the recontextualisation is created through editing. Political party conferences were chopped and diced so that figures such as Gordon Brown made news statements reflecting more of what was arguably lying beneath the surface, rather than the empty political promises. These mashups were a precursor to the popularity of similar work by video artist
What does he really mean by that? To know, you have to crack the political code.
I tell you, it's high time Tony Blair was put into a retirement home, and I finally got my hands on his fucking job.
However, sequences such as the clips which show Cameron to be copying Tony Blair's body language and rhetoric border on a form of journalism.
Everyone could see it. It was like single glazing. The way he used to hold his hands in front of his tits like that.
By taking the tough decisions, tough long-term decisions,
Punch and Judy,
the Punch and Judy politics.
In this case, the footage being reworked and recontextualised is real to begin with. The question is whether a mockumentary that utilises wholly fake found footage can be as illuminating. The central conceit of the Norwegian film Troll Hunter, or Trolldrejeren, is that one is watching a rough cut of 283 minutes of footage anonymously received by the production studio Filmkameratein in October of 2008. This is stated from the outset in pre-titles text, not wholly dissimilar to a certain film from the late 90s. That constitutes the beginning of the Blair Witch Project, arguably one of the original influences of modern found footage films. The real credit may actually go to the last broadcast of the preceding year, and perhaps Cannibal Holocaust deserves a mention, but it is in no small measure due to the pop cultural understanding of Blair Witch that this title card is now seen as an established trope in Troll Hunter. It provides a good bookend for the film narratively, yet viewers are more than likely to appreciate its plea for mock authenticity rather than consider it a true story. Alexandra Helen Nicholas writes of the enjoyment audiences gain from this pretending to be real experience in her analysis of found footage horror films. Yet this might not be the whole story with the film that set the trend. There was a great intention behind the extensive marketing campaign for Blair Witch to spread the misinformation that the footage was real. For both the original website and TV trailers advertising the film, this impression was given together with the imaginative use of missing posters circulated around university campuses and Sundance. What may have also assisted in the realism was the idea of not showing the film's monster. One might draw the conclusion that a murderer is in the woods without reverting to the idea of witchcraft. Troll Hunter does not make the same effort to fool the audience into believing in trolls, showing them eventually in all their computer-generated glory. However, it does still borrow from the techniques of traditional documentary storytelling in much the same way, and the filmmakers are clearly steeped in documentary lore. At one point, college filmmaker Thomas played by Glenn Erland Tosterud, rallies his fellow crew, asking, what is most notable is its use of a kind of pseudo-cinema verite. The three main characters take on the roles of presenter, sound recordist, and camera operator, and thus the artifice is constantly visible. During the first attempt to interview the eponymous troll hunter, Thomas dons a clip-on microphone and approaches him at a distance from the camera so as to remain undercover. On this and another occasion where they are filming a bridge troll from a distance, the use of zoom is obvious and is in fact commented upon.
Det alt for langt unna. Jeg zoomer jo inn. Hvorfor kan vi ikke bare gå nærmere? Nei, jeg zoomer jo inn, vi ser det veldig bra.
Later, when the crew have gained his trust and are driving, Thomas switches on the overhead reading light in order to illuminate the hunter properly for the camera. At one stage, the crew discover the night vision mode, which inevitably becomes pivotal to revealing the location of a troll in the woods at night. In another sequence at breakfast, Thomas holds up a piece of paper with which to recalibrate the white balance. Some shots also begin with the ends of sentences, solidifying the illusion that this is when the cameraman, Cal, played by Thomas Alf Larsson, has switched to record. The film sticks to a singular point of view through one camera, unlike the use of both high-8 digital colour and 16mm black and white in Blair Witch. As a result, we are keenly aware of the fact that this is our only link, our one umbilical cord with the narrative. The fragility of this is shown when Cal, our sceptical point of view, is chased by a tussle lad, a three-headed troll who can smell his Christian blood. Cal falls over and drops the camera, and we can see him upside down at a Dutch angle. This is when he remembers the night vision function. 3/4 into the film, Cal is killed. A crack on the lens reminds us of his sacrifice. Whilst the movie tries to develop the replacement camera operator, the film is already heading into the final scene and has somewhat run out of road for characterisation. For all this, the film does not really paint the trolls as monsters. This is perhaps the truth in metaphor which the film communicates, despite the obvious fiction of proceedings. Hans, on multiple occasions, refers to his duty as dirty work, and rejects the idea that he is any kind of hero, preferring the title of troll management. Director André Overdahl has gone on record as saying that human treatment of animals was a key theme to the film, stating that the trolls are advanced animals. They have a human side to them. They are defenceless. All they care about is getting food, getting shelter, the things that animals, and we, care about as basic needs. They're not there to kill. This sentiment is also echoed in the words of the veterinarian, who Hans visits to submit his troll blood tests. She says, regretfully, indeed, the death of the trolls is often drawn out. At first, the filmmakers shower humour in the idea of trolls existing at all. Joanna Mork's character confides, but as they uncover the conspiracy, they take the audience with them, at least for the duration of the film. Hans is played by Otto Jespersen, who, unlike most of the cast of Unknowns, is famous in Norway. Here one can see that the idea of perceived authenticity is not fixed for every viewer. In fact, it can differ across nationalities, and, as we will see, levels of niche understanding. In this instance, despite knowing that trolls are not real, recognising who Jespersen is could easily derail a type of suspension of disbelief. Equally, the language barrier and use of subtitles creates a gap of understanding between the viewer which assists in a feeling of realism. Well, as long as you can't speak Norwegian. A clip of news footage at the end of the film is recontextualised to include a member of the cast. It also appears to show the Norwegian Prime Minister letting slip the reality of trolls. In actual fact, he is referring to an oil field known as Troll. This caused a lot of debate as to whether he actually said it at the time. As one will see, this kind of public reaction is clearly the thin end of a wedge. Roscoe and Haidt, writing about the roles mockumentaries construct for their audiences, contend that audiences are usually expected to be conscious of the fictionality of the text. This is not necessarily the case with Forgotten Silver from 1995, a film about the discovery of a treasure trove of lost work by the fictional film genius Colin Mackenzie, which managed to fool a great many men and women of New Zealand. The film was the brainchild of Peter Jackson and Costa Botes, and whilst the creators clearly wished for viewers to initially regard the film as fact, Jackson himself was surprised that not all viewers realised it was a hoax, and the determination of some to continue believing in what they had constructed. Much of this misunderstanding could be due to the assumption that viewers have privileged information about film history and scientific practices. Much like being unaware of who Otto Jespersen is in Trollhunter, without knowing the reason for the absurdity of some of the findings, there can be a disconnect from the intended reading. Rhodes and Springer provide an eloquent explanation of this phenomena in the introduction of their study of docufictions, making reference to Spinal Tap, which relies upon the viewer's knowledge of both the tradition of documentary filmmaking and the social attitudes and lifestyles of the heavy metal scene. Jackson and Boats used a cavalcade of techniques from the annals of documentary lore in order to spin their yarn. Rostrum camera shots, film notaries such as Sam Neill, and in addition to so-called experts to back up narrative and technical details, such as for instance how Mackenzie used eggs in the creation of his early films.
Not eggs, egg whites. He used the egg albumin process, which they used in the 19th century for making materials photosensitive. He adapted that though to use for moving images.
Trouble was that it took 12 eggs to make 1 minute of film. That's all right, as long as he was making short films.
Colin was caught red-handed.
But crucially, the films themselves, which are remarkable in their attention to detail. The deterioration that accompanies this imagining of early experimental aviator Richard Pearse is rather convincing. But what follows is another nod to the fact that this is all just an extended wind-up.
The man on the left has a newspaper in his pocket. Digital enhancement allows us to look closer. The Wright brothers' historic flight at Kitty Hawk was not until December the 17th, 1903. Richard Pearse, a farmer from New Zealand, had beaten the Wright brothers into the air by 9 months.
But the thing that I find really funny is if you examine the footage, he's flying straight at Colin Mackenzie, who's filming it, and he has to swerve to avoid Colin, and he crashes into the hedge. And if Colin hadn't been there, he probably would have flown a lot further, and we would have all heard about it.
Despite Jackson's recent miracle work, getting results like that from old film isn't even possible with today's technology. The detail just isn't there to enhance.
Enhance 5719.
But in the context of the film, and without understanding the nature of the technology, this is one of the many deliberate gags that some viewers missed, or perhaps chose to miss. The film is a slow burn for clues to begin with, the first laugh coming with the revelation of a bicycle-mounted camera, which is not beyond the will of man, but eventually the requirements for suspension of disbelief ramps up to include the creation of a life-size replica of Jerusalem.
After days of fruitless searching, would this road lead the team to Colin Mackenzie's lost city?
Keeps on going down here.
No road there and no reason for a road.
Working at fever pitch, the searchers began attacking the dense vegetation. After a week of solid effort, the team's work was starting to pay off.
Yeah, just make it up. Here we go, and 3, 2, 1.
In the end, what is probably the most compelling reason to be convinced is that one wants to believe it is true. Mackenzie is the filmmaker, nay, the man many want to be, but he also represented for New Zealanders a manifestation of national pride. Here was someone who had been there first, did it better than the greats, and even died a hero.
6 months ago, we wrote to every Spanish film archive requesting footage from the Spanish Civil War that was credited to a cameraman named Colin Mackenzie. In the last 6 months, nothing has turned up, not one foot of film, until this morning. We couldn't believe what we were looking at.
The minutes tick by until the order to charge is given. The Battle of Malaga was one of the fiercest of the war. Here we see that Colin is right behind the Republican troops as they charge Franco's fascists. Intent on filming the action, Colin is oblivious to personal danger. As a fresh assault begins, a soldier falls directly in front of Colin. Colin puts the camera down. He runs to help. He stumbles. Both men are killed.
We have witnessed, with Forgotten Silver, the problems faced if a mockumentary is almost too convincing, and despite best efforts, its own mode of production, the clues to its fictionality, have gone unheeded. Yet the solution to warn viewers at the outset seems self-defeating. Stella Bruzzi suggests that the opening scene in the black comedy Man Bites Dog, of a woman being strangled to death on a train, informs the viewer it is not real, since the woman does not appeal to the camera. However, it is conceivable that the idea of the invisibility of the camera is so ingrained for some that this may go by unnoticed. Or perhaps these clues should suffice. One could argue that Forgotten Silver represented a wake-up call for those who would not question. As the idiom goes, fool me once.
If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
One of the many negative responses to the film was an anonymous call to TVNZ, which included the line, "From now on, anything that the media produce, whether it be by word or film, will be regarded with disbelief." One might consider that progress. Canadian mockumentary television series Trailer Park Boys appears at first to be a mockumentary with the mock focused on the characters, but there is a great deal of heart. This may not be romantic ethnography, but it does to an extent allow the viewer entrance to a kind of staged back region. The location, at least for the initial seasons, was a real trailer park. The creator Mike Clattenburg had a suburban upbringing in Nova Scotia, the setting of the fictional Sunnyvale, so it is possible that this is a form of fetishization and could be considered a taxidermy of trailer park life. That is, a recreation in the mould of what one expects trailer park life to be. As Sharon Sherman states in Documenting Ourselves, folklorists need not travel far to discover folklore being generated. The most successful folklorist filmmakers have, in fact, examined traditions in their own locales. In this way, it is interesting that mockumentary is not immune to some of the criticisms levelled at documentary. Indeed, there is a voyeuristic dimension to the appeal of the show that Patricia Hughes Fuller has deemed carnivalesque, especially the transgressional behaviour and physical attributes of the main archetypal characters. Julian never without a rum and coke, Randy never seen wearing a shirt. Despite the reliance on archetypes, the characters are not all one-dimensional. One can confidently say, for example, that the characters of Randy and Jim Leahy passed the Vito Rousseau test. However, it would be difficult to argue that subversion in the show goes so far as to earn it the label of mock ethnography. In Doris Day's Enlightenment Guaranteed from the year 2000, 2 German tourists visit Japan and the viewer gets a sense of the filmmaker's self-awareness of ethnographic documentaries, in this case the reaction of Westerners to the East. Noted especially in a scene in a Japanese monastery by Heather Bembo due to its lingering observation of the rituals. In Trailer Park Boys there is no presenter or Griersonian style narration. Whilst the crew have made appearances, any exposition, resolution or moralising is done by the characters themselves. In this way it is similar to the observational nature and direct cinema of David and Albert Maysles' Grey Gardens. Julian, Ricky and Bubbles invite the viewer to see events from their perspective. Equally, much like most of the work by the Maysles brothers, the subjects are down on their luck and struggling against societal norms. For example, Julian and Rick are in and out of jail, and the trailer park manager Officer Leahy struggles with his sexuality and uses alcohol to deal with losing his position at the police force back in the 1970s.
It turns out that I have another engagement. I plan to get drunk. Thank you.
Of course, one need not be reminded that these are fictional subjects, and that whilst many sequences include partially or completely unscripted elements from the actors, the reason for their writing credits, a narrative has been planned from the outset, and, in the words of Bill Nichols, introduces the moralising perspective or social belief of an author and a structure of closure whereby initiating disturbances can receive satisfactory resolution. One could make the case that an early schooling in a film that mocks the format of documentary, such as The Rutles, may prepare you for a film such as Forgotten Silver, or any film of questionable credibility. Indeed, both include imitations of reality that could pass for the original, and Roscoe and Hite catalogue Silver as only a Degree 1 mockumentary, at least in agenda, if not its effect. The recontextualisation of recognisable factual images in a show such as Time Trumpet can spell out the truth through satire, and whilst it is possible to bow to stereotype or even create new ones, the aesthetics of documentary can be used as a device to connect an audience to a fiction which achieves similar through metaphor. All in all, as long as mockumentary continues to develop in parallel to the established documentary format, in the words of a letter to the New Zealand listener in 1995, there is a chance we will keep a pinch of salt handy when watching supposedly more serious documentaries.